Hey, folks. Good afternoon. We're going to get started here. Ooh, and it seems like I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So let me maybe turn off my other monitor here real quickly. There we go. I don't want to listen to myself. There we go. I think that'll be better. We're going to talk about what happens when things don't work, which is perfect because that was something not working the way I expected to for just a moment. And stuff doesn't work all the time. So today let's talk a little bit about something that we don't get taught real often. This isn't a conversation about success. This isn't a conversation about motivation or inspiration. We're going to talk about what happens when something just doesn't work, when it just doesn't work. When a painting isn't coming together, when a chapter refuses to cooperate, or perhaps more importantly, when a business idea flops or a project goes sideways at work, when a lesson that you've spent hours preparing for completely bombs. And we've all been there. I have been there, and I'll be there again. And so the question isn't whether that happens, it's what do we do next when that happens? Because it's going to happen. The big thing is that failure isn't the end of the process. We have a tendency, I think, to think of creativity like idea, work, success. And that's what it looks like. You have the idea and you put in effort, and then da da da, it's successful. But really, creativity is a lot more like idea, some work, confusion, failure, revision, unexpected discovery, idea, work, confusion, failure, unexpected discovery, some more work, and then some success. Or maybe something completely different. Every artist has abandoned paintings. I have a number of things here that are painted over paintings, and we know that of famous artists that we're finding now, that there are old paintings under what are now revered classics, where artists have painted over old things. And we've found through new techniques where we'll find that there were errors and maybe something has been corrected, a nose or a part of a structure. And that's just growth, that's just change. Every writer has chapters that they delete. Just for giggles, I brought this book over with me, The Jester's Grin, the first full-length novel that I wrote. There is this much of discarded chapters from this full series. There's at least this much of discarded chapters of content that just meh, didn't make it in. Because that's just part of the game of stuff just doesn't work sometimes, and you just have to be willing to pull it out. And likewise, every leader has an initiative or 10 that didn't gain traction. Every teacher has lessons that completely miss the mark. That's again the nature of the beast, kind of. And that isn't evidence that you're bad by any means. It's evidence that you are doing real work. Because if nothing you do ever fails, then you're probably only doing things that you already know how to do. You're not taking any risks, you're not taking any chances. So failure is you pushing yourself. And I also want to talk a little bit about something that I think particularly the modern world has gotten us into, and that's the danger of forcing progress. Because one of the biggest mistakes I think people can make, and that I see people make, is believing that effort is gonna fix the problem. So more effort, more work is gonna fix whatever the issue is. Sometimes more effort just digs the hole deeper. So, for instance, and we'll take some creative kind of endeavors first. But if you're looking at a painting, for instance, and you think I just need one more brushstroke here, one more little piece. Well, you get 20 brush strokes in, and you've just made mud, because what you really needed to do was walk away and let what was there dry just a little bit so that you could do those more brush strokes, but it needed to dry some. Writers can think, I just need to keep writing. I need to just push, 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 push. But suddenly you've written 3 chapters that don't belong, and maybe just going out for a walk to think about it is what you really needed to do. We see that in workplaces and office work. In There just are more meetings, and the meetings get longer. There are more spreadsheets, there are more reports, we have more checklists coming out. um, but nobody ever stops to ask, are all of these new processes and new elements actually solving the right problem? Have we actually stopped to address what is the problem that we're solving? And education can be really similar, adding interventions, adding assessments, adding requirements without really stopping to go, does this approach even make sense? Sometimes the smartest thing that you can do, particularly in support of creativity, is to stop. Just stop. It's not giving up. It is gathering information. It's gathering input. It's asking yourself, what exactly isn't working? What is it really that's not working? Is the problem effort? Is it my approach? Is it my assumptions? Or am I trying to solve an entirely wrong problem? Am I not even solving the right problem? And as you can imagine, all of those are super different questions, because we're addressing, again, different problems. And working harder isn't really going to fix anything, because if you're not addressing the right problem, obviously working harder isn't going to fix a thing. So then let's transition to a little bit deeper dive. I want to talk a little more about why walking away isn't quitting. And that's diving a little bit deeper into this idea, because this is a part I do think that people in creativity can sometimes struggle with, because walking away can feel like failure when sometimes it's really wisdom. And I mean, examples like I've already given some examples: going for a walk, sleeping on it is definitely a great example. Like actually just putting down whatever it is and just sleeping on it. If we're talking about the arts, and let's say painting or writing, painting something else, writing something completely different, another chapter, another story. But working on something different at work, a different project, transition to something else to work on. That's not what you're racking your brain on, because your brain keeps solving problems while you're not looking at them. You've planted the seed, now you got to let it grow. That's incubation, and it isn't magic, and it isn't laziness. It's your brain working the way it was designed to work. When you are deeply invested in solving a problem, Your conscious mind has a tendency to get stuck in a single pattern, and you're going to keep trying that thing, that same thing, that pattern over and over and over again because it's the last thing you thought of. So when you walk away, you interrupt that conscious loop, and your subconscious mind has the ability to work on it instead. And that's why so many people get ideas in the shower or while driving or while gardening or washing dishes or something like that. It's because your brain is going to keep making those connections in the background, but it's because you've given it time to breathe. It needs and craves that time to work things out subconsciously. Sometimes I think of creativity kind of like baking bread, like baking bread. You do, and for reference, it's probably because I like to bake bread and I'm kind of good at it. You don't need the dough continuously for 6 hours. There's work, and then there's rising. And if you interrupt that rising because you are impatient, you're actually going to slow the process down. And that creative unconscious work often has the need for patience for kind of seasons like that. There are moments for really focused efforts, and that's when you'll even get into that flow state, that work state. But there are moments for stepping away, and that again is not laziness. That's part of really making something good, because you can't command creativity. You can create conditions where creativity has a chance to show up. Um, so let's talk a little bit about another thing that I find really important in creativity and creative process, and that is trust the process, but don't worship it. This is something that I think people can misunderstand, because you'll hear me say trust the process a lot, a whole lot, and it's incredibly important, uh, to a point, to a point, because processes exist because they usually work. They are there as guides. They're there because they've been used for, in some cases, millennia. But for a long, long time, and workplace processes and all that kind of stuff, and they're supposed to be in place to make things easier, more streamlined, better for us. Um, but dude, they ain't the laws of physics. Sometimes the process isn't working. A good creator improvises. Good leaders improvise. Good teachers, good managers, they improvise. Instead of just asking, all right, what's the next step in this checklist, in this process? It's, what are we trying to accomplish? What is the intent of this objective? So it's really knowing the objective, it's knowing the process, but being truly flexible about the path. And I think that that is, one of the biggest differences I see between really experienced people, even masters of the crafts, and people who are more inexperienced. Beginners can become really attached to instructions and really attached to process. Whereas those who are more experienced tend to be more attached to the outcome and the intention. Um, if you've ever watched an experienced chef, for instance, an experienced cook, they rarely follow recipes exactly. A seasoned teacher rarely delivers the lesson exactly as it's written in a lesson plan. They're going to read the room, as we say, and pay attention to what's going on with the various students, with the various learners, and give them what they need. Likewise, an experienced leader is rarely going to run a meeting exactly according to an agenda, because something is going to come up that's going to, that they're going to need to pivot, to improvise a little bit. And it's not because they're ignoring process. They thoroughly understand why the process, why the model, why the paradigm exists. But once you understand the purpose, you can adapt without losing your direction. And that's really where, expertise and mastery lives. Um, I think of it in a corporate setting, and let's say a meeting isn't producing decisions, and I think this is a place where we see these kind of things a lot, and I want to pull this back to corporate as much as I can, just because I know we're having a creativity discussion, and it's easy to think of it in painting and writing and the things we think of as creativity, but I want to really focus in on corporate and teaching and things like that. But in this case, let's say you're in meetings, you're trying to solve a problem, and instead of what we so often see, let's schedule another meeting. We didn't solve it in half an hour, so let's make this one an hour. um, you know what? Maybe that's not what we do, because that didn't work last time. So maybe everyone writes independently first. What is it we're trying to solve for one thing? So let's put it into words succinctly. What are we trying to solve? And make sure that we can do that succinctly, because that's a great test. Can we succinctly put and agree upon what we're trying to solve? And then maybe everyone writes independently first around how they think it should be solved for. Um, and then perhaps the ideas are provided through an anonymous form and grouped together before the next meeting. And now you get to remove hierarchy from the brainstorming. You give those who are introverted and who are neurodiverse time to think. You've reduced groupthink. You've made the meeting about making decisions instead of generating ideas on the spot. And that's not actually what meetings are great for. They're not really good for generating ideas on the spot unless you just want the ideas from your loudest voices and your extroverts, and the neurotypical folks in the room. That's who you're going to get it from. Because the objective wasn't have another meeting. It was, I'm assuming, to solve a problem. It was to get better thinking. So think about it a little bit differently. And from an educational perspective, students, let's say students aren't engaging. And so the tendency we see a lot of times, or I certainly saw a lot of times in the classroom whenever I was teaching, was let's add more games and let's add more technology and let's add more use of their phones and let's just make sure that they're engaged that way. Maybe that's not what they need. Maybe the lesson isn't wrong. Maybe the format is. Maybe they need to move. Maybe it would be nice to get them up and moving. Maybe they need to move their bodies. Maybe they need to teach each other and not listen to an adult voice all the time, or your voice or another voice. Maybe they need to build something instead of watching something. Maybe they need silence instead of stimulation. Sometimes we assume more engagement means more excitement and more noise, but sometimes engagement comes from ownership and being part of the process instead. So thinking about the really understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. And then, in art, the painting isn't becoming realistic enough is one I hear a lot. And maybe it doesn't want to be. Maybe it wants to be abstract. So let it be. Just let it be. And the next one will be realistic, or maybe the third one will be realistic. If your writing in a chapter refuses to work out, we already kind of talked about this one. Maybe you're starting in the wrong place. Write a different chapter. Heck, write a different story altogether. But don't force where you are. It goes back to that, kind of let the creativity happen, and don't force it to happen the way you think it has to happen. um and some of that has to do with, and this might be something, if you've taken a creative thinking class or anything like that, you may have heard of this idea before, of broad thinking before narrow thinking. Um, because I do think it's one of the biggest creative skills that people can develop, is first really thinking about possibilities without a lot of judgment, of what are different ideas, what are the what ifs, how might we do this. And I like to approach things with the might. How might we, how could we approach this problem, this opportunity, with as little judgment as possible. Let them kind of bubble up, maybe write them down, don't discard them. And then you converge on an idea after collecting a number of them, and you choose, and sometimes you choose a number of them. In fact, that's often what I find happens, is that after you've generated possibilities, you go, I'm gonna take a little of this, I'm gonna take a little of this, I'm gonna take some of that, I'm gonna take a scooch of this, and now I've got this thing that was nothing like what I thought of before, and this is the thing I'm going to choose, and then I'm going to execute. Too many people just converge immediately. They have one idea, and then it's like, I guess I'm gonna do this. This is the thing I'm doing. I recommend, like, write down 10 ways that this could work. What if I change the medium, the audience, the perspective? What if I removed half of it? What if I looked at it from a different angle? And come at it from just different perspective. Talk to some other people if you're having a hard time with it, and maybe talk to some other individuals who aren't associated to get some ideas, and then commit, because execution and the work do matter. But but don't do that until you've done some curious exploration first. Um, I think the important part is that failure usually isn't what defines people. Recovery does. Adaptation, curiosity, thinking about every person that you've admired, not because they're famous, not because they build things. Um, I promise you that every person that you admire has a long list of things that didn't work. The difference is that they did not avoid failure. They did not make failure part of their identity. They let it become part of their education. There is a huge difference between saying, "This project failed and I am a failure." One of those is useful information, and one of those is just a false narrative. Be very, very careful which one you choose to believe. So I want to ask you guys a couple of questions here before we go into the final. I've got a few things that I'd just like you to think on here. One, just reflect on a project that you walked away from that eventually became successful. Something that you had to put down and come back to that eventually worked out, that you really thought, "This is gonna tank, this is gonna tank." And then it became successful. What made that become successful? What role did you walking away from it play? So a project that you walked away from, that you eventually came back to, that worked out, what made it become successful? And what role did you walking away from it play? I actually dropped a class once that I wasn't ready to take. I remember that distinctly. I knew I just was not ready for it, and I came back to it about 3 years later and took it and aced it. Um, but I was not ready. Yeah, I remember that distinctly. I was so ashamed I dropped it. Oh, man, because I was not that wasn't my style, but I was just not ready. I was not ready. Um, but man, I did really well when I came back to it. Yeah. And then number 2, this is the only other question I'll ask today. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from something that failed? So what is the biggest lesson you've learned from something that would be classified as a failure? That's a loaded question. Um, 'Cause that could be a lot of things, right? That could be, project at work, that could be something in your personal life, that could be a relationship. I mean, that could be a lot of different things. But what's the biggest lesson you've learned from something that failed? I mean, I definitely learned I'm quite capable of doing my own website work because I was working with a web publisher and that failed. So, on a positive note, I guess there's that, but that's not quite what I was looking for. Although, well, folks, one things I've learned over the years is that creativity is, and I think I said this already, is that creativity is a conversation. It is not a command. You don't tell a painting what it's going to become. You don't force a story to reveal itself. You don't force a team into its best ideas. You ask questions, you listen, you adjust, and you improve and you try again. And that's going to be true whether you're standing in front of a canvas. It's going to be true whether you're writing a novel, leading a classroom, or managing a project at work. The work talks back. And the better you become at listening, the better your work is going to become. We spend a lot of time trying to avoid failure. And we forget that failure is actually really fantastic information. The goal isn't to never fail. The goal is to become someone who knows what to do when things don't work. That's true in art, it's true in writing, in classrooms, in offices, and in life. The people who keep creating are not the ones who never fail. They are the ones who understand that failure isn't the end of the road. It is just a really important part of the journey. And I hope to see you here next time. There is another one of these scheduled for next month. Until then, please go forth, fail beautifully, create wonderfully, learn from it, pivot, and do it fearlessly. I would love to hear about it. Please keep in touch. Feel free to communicate with me, email me any of the answers to any of those questions if you would like to. Keep the conversation going outside of our YouTube live here. And I hope to see you next month here in the studio above the clouds. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of July. And I'll see you again soon, folks. Bye.